Greetings to everybody at Whittlesea Straw Bear Festival. It's me, Dave Tonge, the Yarnsmith of Norwich storyteller. And I'm coming today from my own small cottage not far from Norwich in Norfolk in the middle of winter. And a cruel and hard winter at that. The darkest of seasons, when Mother Winter wrapped herself around the land like an icy cloak, her long bitter fingers reaching inside one and all, tickling their ribs, chilling them to the bone. And you wouldn't want that, would you? And so, in honour of the season, and in honour of Plough Monday, of course traditionally the end of Christmas, the start of the agricultural year, I thought I would tell you a story about an agricultural labourer, a poor peasant long ago. But if you want to know of the peasant, first you must know of the cook. There he was, about his business, in his kitchen. He was cooking a fine meaty stew to sell to travellers, be they merchants, soldiers, sailors, pilgrims passing by. Picture, if you will, the beefy broth. It's a bubbling and boiling nicely in a great iron cauldron set upon a roaring fire. The steam from the stew, finding the windows, finding the doors, reaching the noses of all without, inviting many within, where they would happily swap some of their hard-earned coin for some of that sweet-smelling soup, and perhaps a crust of bread to mop up every last drop. Well, this day a poor peasant was passing by, a man who earned his living working upon the land. But it was the middle of winter. It was an iron winter. There was little or no work to be had, and so all he had that day was a few poor coins to pay for both food and lodgings. All he had to eat that day was one dry, stale crust of bread, so hard you could use it for knocking wooden posts into the cold, frozen earth. Smelling the soup, seeing the steam leaving the cook's kitchen, the peasant had an idea. I know, thought he, I will take my crust of bread inside. I will hold it in the steam above the stew, making it soft, making it easier to chew. And so that was what he did. Only wishing he had a bit more than a few poor pennies so that he could buy some of that beefy broth. But alas, this day he could not. Well, know this, my friends. The cook was a wealthy man, made rich by all of that beefy broth that he had sold. But like some rich men, not all rich men, but like some, he would never be rich enough. Coming back to his kitchen, he saw the poor man holding his crust of bread in the steam above the stew. He called out, "Rogue, knave and varlet!" He called him a good-for-nothing, steam-stealing thief. He took hold of the poor man by his ragged gown and demanded he pay for the steam that he had stolen. But of course the poor man could not. "And besides," said the labourer, "I've done nothing wrong, for I only took the steam and not your precious stew." But would the cook listen? Of course he wouldn't. And so it was he dragged the poor peasant off to jail, there to await judgment in court. And the following day, both poor peasant, poor labouring man and rich cook, they were brought before the wisest judges in the city. Now I say wise judges, but were they? Because they could not decide the case. Half of them agreed with the rich cook, saying that the steam was part of the stew. It was its very essence, advertising its quality to passers-by. Therefore the poor man should pay for that which he had taken. But the other learned lords of the law, they disagreed. They sided with that poor working man. They said that the steam was just waste, and that the cook was forced to throw open his windows and doors to be rid of it. And no sooner did it hit the air outside than it disappeared. How then? How then could the poor man pay for that which is no one's to keep? How could he steal it in the first place? Well, I wonder where you stand on this issue. I would think that most of you watching this agree with that poor agricultural labourer, that you could not steal steam. The trouble was, no one there in my tale, I should say, they couldn't decide. And so that poor man, he languished in jails for many days until a wise and clever thinker brought their judgment to bear on the case. I'd like to say it was a man, but it was more likely to have been a woman, travelling around dispensing wit and wisdom wherever she went. Coming to the great city, she listened to the case. She heard both arguments, and she agreed with both. For she said, yes, the steam is part of the stew, but that the steam is no one's to keep. And even though she agreed with both rich and poor man alike, still she was able to settle the case. Now some of you are thinking, Yarnsmith, how could she settle a case if she agreed with both of them, if she found favour with both? Well, know this. She ordered that the poor agricultural labourer he pay for the steam that he had taken, but said that the cook could only take the noise the coins make as they fall upon the table. For just as the poor man had only taken the steam and not the stew, so the rich man, he could only take the pleasing chink the coins made, and not the coins themselves. Well, there ends my story for Whittlesea Straw Bear Festival. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I hope you all have a happy 2021, and I hope to see you at Whittlesea or somewhere else on the road in the year to come. Thank you very much, and fare thee well. But before you go, I nearly forgot. I meant to say, if you like that story I've just told, it's one of many that I published last year in my new book, Medieval Folk Tales for Children, and for adults as well. Medieval tales, well, I say that, they're actually pre-medieval tales. They travelled here long, long ago, just as my stories now travel many lands, albeit online. So if you like stories, be sure to check it out, especially if you like medieval folk tales. Well, that's all I've got to say, apart from once again, a Happy New Year to you all, and goodbye.
There was once a young man, and this young man, well, he had no home to call his own. All he possessed in the world were the clothes that he stood up in and the fiddle that he carried. But was our young man sad at his lot? Of course he wasn't. For what need he a home of his own? What need he fine clothes when he had the freedom of the open road and his fiddle for company? And he could play that fiddle. And when he played that fiddle, wherever he was, people would stop and they would find themselves drawn to his music, and then they would begin to dance and sing and laugh and dream. And so, our young man, our fiddler, he would travel from village to town, county to county, playing his sweet fiddle, enchanting the people who lived there. He would play on high days and holidays. He would play in inns and cafes. He would play in market squares and in fields. And very often he would find that at the end of his playing, his pockets would be filled with the jingle and the jangle of many coins. And on those days, he would have a roof above his head. He would pay for a room in an inn and enjoy a soft bed and a fine meal. But on other days, when perhaps there weren't so many coins in his pockets, well, then he would find a grassy mound to lay his head, and he'd look up at a canopy of stars for a roof above his head. And it was a sweet life, and he was happy, for he was free and he had his music. Now, I'm not saying that this young man was always happy. Of course, the seasons change, And whilst it was wonderful in spring and summer to be out on the open road, when winter came around, well, let's just say there were times that our young man dreamed of what life might be like if he did settle down, if he did have a roof above his head to call his own, and a warm fire burning in the hearth each night. And he especially dreamed of that life when the wind howled around his ears and the rain or snow fell upon his head. And so it was, one early spring day, our young man was walking along the free open road when the heavens opened and it began to rain. And it rained and it rained and it rained. And as our young fiddler walked along the road, he started to think about that life that he sometimes dreamed of, about that cottage. He imagined a cosy cottage with a red front door, and he thought about the little piece of land it would have with it, and how he'd be able to grow his own fruit and vegetables and maybe keep the odd chicken or two. And wouldn't it be wonderful when the rain fell to be sitting in front of a roaring fire with the companionship of a dog by his side? Yes, his thoughts started to turn to what that life might be like. And as it did, he found himself turning a corner in the road. And as he made his way round that bend, he suddenly saw, there in front of him, the very cottage he'd just been dreaming of, right down to the same red door. And he could hear the bark of a dog and the cluck of a chicken, and he thought, have I just dreamed this? Have I just conjured this up? And so he felt compelled to go towards the door and see if it was real. And so that's what he did. And the door was real. This was no figment of our young fiddler's imagination. And so he knocked on that red door. The door opened, and there stood a little old wizened man with a long silver beard and long silver hair down to his shoulders. "Ah, I'm pleased you finally arrived. I have been expecting you for some time. Well, don't stand there in the rain. Come on in. I've got a fine feast laid out for you, and a flagon of ale too, and you can warm and dry yourself by the fire." Well, even though the young man felt sure he'd never met this old man before, the thought of a fine feast, the thought of a flagon of ale and a warm fire and an escape from the rain, well, it was too much to resist. And so he accepted the man's offer, and he stepped over the threshold, and sure enough, there was a table filled with all of the young man's favourite food. And so he ate and he drank and he warmed himself by the fire. And then the old man, he chatted to him about what his life was like. He asked the fiddler about the places he'd been. And soon the young man found that day had turned to evening. And the old man said, "Well, you can't go on your way now. Why don't you stay? I have a spare room and a fine soft bed. You may lay your head there tonight." And of course, our young fiddler didn't want to go back out into that cold rain and wind, and so he accepted the old man's offer. It was a wonderful night's sleep, possibly the best night's sleep he'd had in a while. And he woke refreshed in the morning and awoke to the smell of, a wonderful breakfast that the little old man had prepared him. There was bacon and eggs and hot, strong tea. And as the young man sat down to breakfast, he turned to the old man and he said, "You know, it's really strange. Yesterday when I was walking along the road, I was dreaming of what life might be if I lived in a cottage that I could call my own, and that cottage was just like this one, even down to the red door. And then I found myself here. And you have been so kind to me. Surely there must be some way I can repay you."
"Oh, well, actually, now you come to mention it, I was thinking that, well, would you like to stay? Would you like to have this cottage? You can look after the garden and the vegetables I've begun to grow, and you can look after my chickens and my dog, and you can have all of this, all of the things you've dreamed, and all I ask in return is your fiddle."
"You want my fiddle? And in return you're going to give me your house and your land and your dog and your chickens?"
"Yes, I love to play myself, and that's a fine fiddle you've got there."
Well, the young man thought about it. It certainly was a very good exchange. "Well, the only thing is, though, I've got a wedding to play for in the next village. I can't let them down."
"Oh, don't you worry. I shall play in your place. Now, think carefully. An offer like this won't come around every day. What do you say? All of this in exchange for your instrument."
Well, the young man thought to himself, "Yes, why not? Let's give an ordinary life a try." And so he handed over his fiddle. And instantly that old wizened man seemed to have a new spring in his step, and he rushed out of that little red door.
"Bye, bye, enjoy your life,"
and was gone. Well, the young man looked around at his new home, and then he went out and he looked at his little piece of land and all of the earth ready for the vegetables and the fruit, and he fed the chickens and he stroked his new dog, and he began to think to himself, It's strange how life can turn around when you least expect it. And it's also strange because I'm sure I've met that man before. There's something about him, something really familiar. And so as the day wore on and the young man set to work in the garden, digging over the ground, ready to plant the vegetables, he thought more and more about the old man. Where had he met him before? He felt sure he'd seen him at a fair somewhere, or was it an inn, or was it a gathering of family and friends at a wedding or a christening? And the more he thought about it, the more he realised he had seen that man, or someone like that man, everywhere he'd played for the past year. Well, the days passed, and the days turned to weeks, and soon it was summer. And the young man had had much time to think about his new life. And whilst it was lovely to have a roof above his head, there was something not quite right. He missed the freedom of the open road. He missed the freedom to go wherever he pleased, to not have the responsibility of feeding the chickens or watering the plants or looking after the dog. The freedom to meet new people. But most of all, he missed the music. He tried humming and he tried bashing spoons together and clunking pans, but nothing made the sweet sound that his fiddle had made, and he missed its company. And one spring day, the following year, a whole year that had gone past, he found himself feeling lonely in this new life, feeling empty, when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Well, less of a knock, more of a hammering. And he went to open the door, and there was the little man, the little wizened man with his silver beard and his silver hair, brandishing the young man's fiddle. You cheated me! For a year I have been playing this fiddle at fairs and feasts and weddings and in the market square. But you cheated me, for this fiddle has lost its magic. And the young man looked at the little old man and said, "What do you mean? What do you mean I've cheated you? What are you talking about, magic? My fiddle's not magic."
"Yes, it is. I watched you for a whole year before you arrived here at my door. I watched you, and every time you played this fiddle, people stopped and stared and were drawn to you, and then they'd begin to dance and sing and laugh and dream. But not when I play. When I play this fiddle, why, that very first day at the wedding, I had cake thrown at me. They chased me out with their dogs. And every inn and cafe I've gone to, I've been thrown out on my ear. I even spent a week in prison because they said I was not allowed to play in the market square. For a year I have been miserable because of this fiddle that held so much magic."
And the young man suddenly realised, my fiddle isn't magic. The reason people sang and danced and laughed and dreamed when I played is because when I play my fiddle, I play with my heart and my soul. Perhaps, old man, you may have a heart, but maybe you don't have the right soul. And with that, he took back his fiddle and he put it beneath his chin and he began to play. And as he played, the anger that had filled the little old man began to drift away. And the little man found himself laughing and then singing and then dancing. And the fiddler said, "I've tried this life for a whole year, but now it's time for me to go back to the freedom of the open road with music as my company. Thank you, old man." And he continued to play And he left that cottage. He left that little old man dancing and singing and maybe even dreaming. And only once did our fiddler turn round to look at the life he was leaving. And he saw that the cottage had disappeared. But the little old man was still dancing and singing and laughing. But he didn't look back a second time. No, he just went on that open road with his magic fiddle. And you may see him one day come to your home, your town, your village. But he won't stay. But he will fill your heart with joy and laughter, song and dance, and the finest of dreams.
Please consider contributing towards the event at paypal.me/strawbearonline. Any donations will be shared between our artists who have provided their footage for free and the Mayor of Whittlesea's chosen charities. Thank you for watching. We hope you've enjoyed Straw Bear Online 2021. Please subscribe now and click the notifications bell to make sure you don't miss any events. Find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and at strawbear.org.uk.